Yeah!
Greetings. Welcome again to Beer Money America. So, John, here it is. It's actually a little sunny out today.
But just a little.
Bright? What is bright in your world today?
Well, I was been sort of, following some things in the news, and I have sort of a third party perspective on some of the Supreme Court happenings. And it's a little bit, as I was saying, it's a little bit long winded because I think I have to give a little bit of background on sort of like what's going on with some of what's being decided in the Supreme Court. But obviously, there's a bunch of trials involving Trump. Everyone's heard about that, but I don't want to get into like the gory details, of the Trumps and the whys and wherefores of all that stuff. But the issue that's in front of the Supreme Court, which I find interesting, is the idea of presidential immunity, and they're going to have to decide this. So to make it as basic as possible, basically one side is saying, the president can't have blanket carte blanche immunity, because then the president could literally go around killing his political opponents and he'd be immune from repercussions. And the other side is essentially saying, well, the president has to have some immunity because, the president is called to make decisions that are both controversial and, at times, if you and I were to do the things that presidents do, they would be illegal. And I think one of the really good examples that makes that kind of clear was they've brought up this point in time where President Obama ordered drone strikes. I think it was in Afghanistan, but it might have been in Iraq, so don't quote me on that one, where U.S. citizens were killed, targeted and killed by a drone strike. So, I mean, if you're not the president and you strap a hand grenade to a drone and crash it into your neighbor, that's murder. But if you're the president and you're executing a war overseas, and one of the people that's fighting against you happens to be an American citizen who's joined up with the Taliban or whoever he was associated with, and then you take that person out, well, that's part of what the presidency calls for. So, I mean, we wouldn't want to be prosecuting President Obama right now for murder,
right?
Because it just wouldn't make any sense. So basically what it comes down to is the Supreme Court is facing a decision where it's going to have to find a line. What constitutes things that the president is protected for, and what are the things that presidents aren't protected for. And then one of the solutions for how the Supreme Court might do this is sort of throwing the ball back to Congress and saying, okay, if the president does something that's illegal, like murdering his political rivals, then what you'd expect is that he would be impeached and removed from office. And once you're impeached and removed from office, then obviously that would open you up then to further prosecution once you've left. And this is where I sort of come in with the third party part of it, and why it struck me, and I've been sort of thinking about it. Our politics are so divided, and both sides are so convinced that the other side is so evil, that if, say, Biden were to have Trump killed, would the other Democrats in the Senate remove him from office? I mean, honestly, as disturbing of a thought as that is, I think that there would honestly, they would just say, okay, look, he committed treason, he was an insurrectionist, he should have been tried and convicted and put to death for treason anyway. So the fact that Biden made this workaround, do you get to a 2/3 vote on that? So if the solution to the presidential immunity issue that is now before the Supreme Court is to run it through an impeachment process, having a coalition of people who actually want to look at the facts and make determinations about what the person actually did and whether or not it is, worthy of being impeached and removed from office, as opposed to what we have now, where I suspect every president will be impeached and it will always just get hung up in the Senate and won't go anywhere. Because you're talking about like real world things that are coming before the Supreme Court now that are going to either empower the president to do outrageous things with no consequences, or back the president into such a terrible corner that they're ineffective as a chief executive. So that makes the impeachment process that we've been muddling up for the past, I don't know, 15 years now, incredibly important. And so
Right.
it goes back to the idea that you have to have this coalition within the Senate where you have at least some group of people in the middle that are disinterested about who's being impeached. They can just look at the facts and say this warrants removal or it doesn't warrant removal, rather than, oh my God, if we remove our guy, we may never win another election. So even though he did this horrible thing that he shouldn't have done, we can't touch him because it makes us invaluable as a party. So, or I should say, inviolate. So I mean, that's kind of where I was thinking about it, just sort of as an idea that this dialectic that we have now, this tribal Senate, in the going forward in the future, it's just going to be a bigger and bigger problem.
Well, two things that just came to mind as you were talking through that. Number one, the whole impeachment process in theory is a good one, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in practice, it's never worked. I mean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, Bill Clinton was impeached and never did work. And, obviously Trump's been impeached a few times. It didn't work. And and Andrew Jackson, when he was impeached, nothing happened, right? As
Yeah.
far as if I remember my history correctly. Um, and and now it looks like Biden will probably be impeached at some point if he hangs
Right.
around long enough, right? So
But that's
number one, probably impeachment. It's kind of like the electoral college in my mind. It was probably a good idea at the time, but maybe the whole thing needs to be just reviewed about how that whole thing goes. But
right.
then, the second point on the whole impeachment thing is, it seems like it shouldn't be that difficult to determine, and this is where your third party piece comes in. I totally agree with everything you said. What is common sense sort of things a president would do that would be, that would make them guilty of some kind of crime? And
Yeah.
when you put it in the example of, hey, why don't we float it out there, since it's been, at least the liberal side is saying that Trump's lawyers, and I hate to bring up Trump in this whole thing, but Trump's lawyers have positioned it that, hey, he needs, complete immunity. And they asked the question, well, if still Team Six came in and he ordered them to come kill an opponent, would he be immune from that? And that was their position, that, well,
Right.
if he hasn't been impeached, basically, yeah, he'd be immune from that. But what you did, you twisted that, and it's like, okay, well, let's put the theory out there. Okay, so that means it's okay in your mind. Biden can do the same thing and go kill Trump. I guess that's okay, right? I mean, it reverses that argument, and which makes it so apparent that this is totally absurd. The whole conversation has become so absurd because of the tribalism, and
Right.
maybe the obviously one of the ways potentially to get around that is the third party piece of this, is because
Yeah.
we have to get to a point where people are incented, meaning politicians are incented to do the right thing. And right
Right.
now, there's no incentive for them to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I completely agree with your notion of incentive, because what incentivizes politicians is power and being reelected. And so even though common sense might tell you something that, a president or other politician did, warrants being removed from office, you might be disincentivized from actually voting for that,
Absolutely.
because you say, okay, well, again, it goes back to the whole electoral thing. Well, I mean, if President Biden right now were to actually be removed from office, well, that would hurt all the Democrats down the ticket from
Yeah.
him, when the election comes up, because everybody go, wow, Biden, man, was so bad that they actually removed him from office. That's crazy. It's unheard of. What are all the other, what have all these other Democrats been doing? And so
Yeah.
you're essentially disincentivized from doing what you know is right and what common sense tells you that you should be doing. But again, if you had that third party element that was disengaged from this sort of like ridiculous bipolar system that we have, that could make the decision. Not only would it, you know, provide an avenue for a coalition to make a reasonable decision about something, but it actually gives cover to the other two sides because they can look at what the third party is doing, the new party, and be like, well, he's going to be removed from office anyway, and so I might as well do the thing that at least looks ethical, and then
Right.
you know you can sort of cast the blame at the new party if you wanted to. And again, I'm kind of fine with that because the way I see it is that you could have, if the third party is really acting the way that it should and trying to be as reasonable as it can, it would be just as likely to side with the Democrats as it would be to side with the Republicans.
Absolutely.
And then if the new party was being outrageous and doing something ridiculous, then you could actually have the Democrats and Republicans coming together, as unimaginable as that seems, to censor the new party.
Yeah.
But all that works much, much better.
No, absolutely. No, and that I never really had thought about it from that perspective. I'm glad you brought that up because everything has, even if at this point, even if the Supreme Court, regardless of any of these cases that they're dealing with, actually is trying to do the right thing, there's no way anybody's going to believe. There's going to be a large chunk of people that will never believe any of it.
Yeah.
Right. I
Right.
mean, it's there's just this halo effect over everything that's going on. Supreme Court, legislation, you name it, that there's, and in some cases it's probably true. There's a a backhanded reason why they're doing certain things, some political
Yeah.
reason they're doing things, and that all comes down to the fact that it's either it's a bilateral thing. It's either a yes or no on everything. And reality is most things are, well, it's kind of in the middle,
Right.
right?
And
And
that
that's what
also goes,
compromise is supposed to be about. But we have no ability to do that now, except
but
for
that's
when
what
it comes to TikTok.
right. Yeah, the TikTok thing is fascinating. That there does seem to be
That's
bipartisan support to
we'll get
blow it
back
up.
on. We'll finish this one, but then we'll get on to TikTok.
But yeah, no, I was just going to say that the having the third voice in the conversation can add credence to either side's argument for whatever reason. I mean, again, this is sort of what I've been saying about having a new party that, really is about transparency, openness, and, trying to have sort of an honest, like an honesty party
Right.
where it's like you're not forced to agree with one side or the other. You can have a completely different way from both. But at the same time, when one side has something that's a good idea, you can acknowledge that good idea or, come out against a side that has a bad idea. But when you do that, because you're not, trying to like take their voting share anymore, you're just
Right.
standing up for what you believe, to come out and say, look, I don't always agree with the Democrats. I don't always agree with the Republicans, but on this particular one, the Democrats have it right. They
Yeah.
say that they want to do this. That's a much more sensible position. And therefore I support them in this particular issue.
Yeah.
So again, it allows not only original thought, but it allows the reinforcement of good ideas and hopefully sets things moving in a better direction.
Well, and the interesting part of that too is, like we've talked before, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a third of the representatives, whether they're
Yeah.
in the House or the Senate. You can have really a small group. I mean, in the Senate, if you had 10,
One.
15, one really, yeah, right?
Yeah.
We've seen one doing it in Senate.
Yeah.
But even in the House, if you even had 10 or 20 that were truly independent, that's all the power you need
Right.
to bring people together. Because when they're literally, it's a 2 or 3 vote swing, depending on how the tribes are beating the drum.
Right.
It doesn't take much. And I mean, if there was any message, hopefully we get out through this podcast is, listen, guys, we're not talking about revolution here. We're talking about a small step evolution that can have huge impact.
Yeah. Well, that's what I say.
I think.
And I also go back to the whole RFK Jr. running. I mean, if he can get on the ballot in all 50 states, he's going to have a huge impact on the election. And
Totally.
that's one person running for one office. And if you could actually have a party that had a message that was appealing to a big section of the population, which I think is possible. We've talked about some of the
Yep.
platform ideas that we might have for this show. And you start to get those ideas out there, just a few wins here and there. Even and as I say, we talk a lot about local stuff. Even in local stuff,
Yep.
you start moving the ball away from the idea that a new party is a hopeless concept, and start moving towards the idea of how do we make the third party into something that's really productive. And you start with the little steps, which is one of the
Yep.
reasons I like doing this podcast, because I understand that we are small time. Let's be honest with ourselves. But it's a lot of little small time pieces coming together to get a medium sized piece, and then that medium sized piece then can get rolled into a bigger piece. And it's just that it's the time to start moving the ball on changing our politics in this country. I mean, I think was due a long time ago, but it
Right.
certainly needs to be happening now.
Well, and I don't know. Again, maybe it's that new car smell, and you know that. But it just seems like everywhere I read and listen to and think, people are so frustrated that the words third party and independent are coming up over and over and over again. I don't, obviously nobody's really figured it all out yet,
Right.
but it's clearly not just this kind of fringe idea, where it's definitely a mainstream thought process going on right now. And people are now trying to figure out how to make it actually happen. But, I just hear it all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the first step, I guess, right? Get people talking about it, thinking about that. Hey, this doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be a really good thing. And it's not all about being spoilers and all this kind of stuff. And it's really to kind of move the country forward in a positive way, a
Yeah.
constructive way.
Yeah.
We're not trying to destroy anything. It's trying to build something. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, no, which brings us to TikTok. what, I'm still kind of trying to figure out what brought Democrats and Republicans together, because it was a huge majority
Yeah.
in the House that wants to ban TikTok if they don't sell it to an American company. The whole premise of it seems just kind of so funny to me, because, well, number one, it's doing the turnabout of what China has done. There's so many restrictions in China for whatever Twitter, well, whatever they call
Yeah.
themselves, X, Facebook, all these things. The what happens there on Facebook is nothing like what happens here, and so it's kind of a turnabout about that, which is kind of interesting. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not too sure I distrust TikTok any more than any other social media company out there,
Yeah.
considering everything we're doing right now. I guarantee you, YouTube is slicing and dicing and
Mhm.
compartmentalizing and figuring out where they can use this information and all that kind of stuff. So, once it's out there on the wild west of the web, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's always something they can do about it, and they can try and influence elections and all that.
Yeah.
But we're doing that domestically. I
Right.
mean, all the crazy stuff that's out there, most of it is created domestically. Yes, Russia's done stuff, and
Mhm.
China's done stuff, and other people have done things, but most of it is generated right here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand that the claim by Congress is that China owns a controlling interest in TikTok. I haven't actually looked at their stock statements
Right.
or any of their disclosures, so I don't know if that's of 100% if that's true, or if it's just something that people are worried about. But and as somebody who's not a regular TikTok user, I'm sort of like in the weeds on that one. But I would say that all in all, as far as social media goes, I'm not sure that TikTok is really doing anything that's particularly different than anyone else. And I guess the concern is that the data that they collect ends up in the hands of the Chinese. But
Yeah.
the thing is, I'm pretty sure the Chinese have all of our personal data anyway from
Exactly.
a million other sources. They can just buy it from people who
Yes.
sell data. So I'm not really sure why having TikTok collecting data that ends up in China is really any different than Facebook collecting data that gets bought by China.
No, exactly. That's exactly where my head's at on it. And yes, it probably does help them target some, false advertising, conspiracy things to try and influence
Yeah.
elections and all that kind of stuff. But I guess my response to that is all the more reason we need to have a third party and other reasonable individuals out there who are kind of throwing a penalty flag when stupid stuff is going on, because I'd rather have people be an intelligent population
Yeah.
than automatically going reading some of these things that are you can just see are just okay, what, where's this coming from, kind of thing. And get people to the point where they're self-analyzing this stuff themselves. And I'm sure you've over the years have gotten it. I'll get emails occasionally from people I know, and it's suggesting some crazy conspiracy theory
Yeah.
or whatever or whatever. And and I'll look at it and I'll go, okay, where did you get this? What's the source of this information? And I mean, I've even had that happen here locally when I'm actually was at a bar drinking. Not that I drink that much, but the bartender was telling me that she had heard that in Carlsbad school, a specific Carlsbad school, they were allowing kids to identify as cats, and they are allowing them to go they have a litter box in the bathroom that they can go to the bathroom in. And going, and who's telling you this?
I'm not sure I'm
Where is
buying that one.
it? Because my wife works for the school district, and I think I would have heard about that if that was really true.
Yeah,
Because
that might
she
have gotten out.
she she was, I mean, she was adamant. No, it's true. My friend told me it's true. So it's like, okay. And it's like, I was trying, well, all I'm asking you to do is just do a little research, just try and find out where that came from. Because I'd rather have people just do that on their own and just don't believe everything you hear. Don't
Right.
believe everything you and I are saying.
Oh
Man,
no.
I
Yeah.
mean, go check it out.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of freedom of speech and press and all that. That, hey, get those ideas out there, but don't necessarily, you don't have to believe everything you hear.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually are taught that when you're, I don't know, 10,
Yeah.
9.
Well, that's also brings back to, it always comes back to me about the new party, the third party piece, which is if you can put a wedge in between the two sides and start saying things that are different or agreeing and disagreeing with different people, you can sort of break away from the system we have now, which is, you go listen to your tribe's news, quote unquote
Right,
news, whatever they call it these days, and you don't listen to the other tribe's news because
right,
the other tribe is a bunch of liars.
right.
But if you have somebody in the middle saying, look, you can't, you don't need to believe either side. In fact, you shouldn't believe either side. You should listen to what both sides have to say. You should listen to what the new tribe is also saying. And that forces people to go away from my tribe is the one telling the truth and the other tribe is the one that's lying. Because
Right,
because this is always my thing about like presidential debates and why it was to be so important to get Ross Perot, which is what I go back to getting into the
right,
presidential debates. It's like you have two people debating. Person A calls person B the devil, then person B calls person A the devil, and you're not getting anywhere. But as soon as you put that third person in there, and let's say person C and person B are in agreement on a particular issue, well, now person A has to call person C and person B the devil, and it starts to be
exactly,
like that doesn't necessarily make any sense. Well, B and C don't exactly agree with each other, so how are they both entirely wrong?
exactly.
Right? And why both people, even though they don't really agree with each other, are both motivated solely by evil, and person A is the only one who's actually the truth teller. You start
Yep.
to look at that and you're like, wait a minute, that's strange credulity. Maybe I should go look at what other people are saying, or other ideas or something else. But it's when you have just the two sides, it's just way too easy to have them just cast aspersions to each other and then do nothing else.
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like such a simple solution in so many ways. Nothing's ever simple, but
Yeah,
it's a relatively logical next step just to have that third voice out there. And the third voice is there. We just need to figure out
yeah,
how to bring it together to give it a little more amplification. That hey, here's another thought.
yeah,
It, it's not necessarily black or white. It's kind of in the middle. It is gray, and and that, that brings me back to the old monkey song. Do you remember the monkey song, "Shades of Gray"?
no, I don't
They
think I
had a
do know that
song called. Okay, well, you'll have to look it up now. Go on YouTube.
one.
Monkeys, Shades of Gray, and the whole premise of the song is they're using these examples. Everybody wants to think it's one or the other, but usually in most things in life, it's there's a shade of gray really that it all falls into, right?
Yeah,
So I always think of that song when people are like so adamant about it's got to be this way, it's got to be that way. It's like, does it? Probably not.
yeah,
Very few things are that black and white,
yeah.
and particularly when it comes to politics and policies.
Well, one other thing that it's sort of, I don't know why this sort of popped into my head, but I've been sort of wanting to say it about the difference between compromise and coalition. So I think a lot of time, we get a lot of third party advocates talking about how, we should promote, compromise between the parties and people working together and doing these things. But I mean, it's like if you believe that somebody is absolutely wrong on an issue, well, I mean, you should be able to stand up to that and say, look, I'm not compromising on this because I believe this is absolutely wrong.
Right.
Versus building a coalition where it's like if you have enough voices and ideas and people who are willing to actually think about an issue, you actually can amass a majority of people that are in agreement on a good way forward rather than creating some kind of compromise which is bad for everybody. And
Least common
so
denominator.
right. And so there's always a lot of talk about, when people talk about third parties about compromise. We need to make sure we have compromise, and we should introduce compromise, and we should be
Yeah.
compromising. I think in a lot of respects, compromise is a dirty word. We should be building coalitions of people who agree on what the correct course of action is, not always having flabby compromises that are bad for everybody.
Yeah, totally agree. No, and that's really a good distinction because it's an important distinction that I think this um, kind of bifurcation that we're living in right now has really brought that to a head. It's like on
Yeah.
those few occasions where both sides do kind of get together on something, it's usually pretty weak
Yeah.
and almost meaningless to the point that I think we discussed that before, like on the border security stuff. I mean, by the time they actually got that latest border bill together, I'm not saying it wasn't had a little bit more teeth to it, but it had to have been so compromised to
Right.
allow enough people to get on board. Not that it ever did really go anywhere. Um, it's just never going to be great, even though fundamentally there are a lot of good things. They need to just enforce the laws we already have.
Right.
But
Exactly.
number two, if there are some, and there everything's open for improvement. If there's
Hmm.
some improvements, there's enough reasonable people. If that third party was around that could bring those coalitions together and
Right.
say, okay, this makes a lot more sense to how we need to process these people faster or not even let them in to begin with or whatever the case may be. But the only way that's probably not going to happen through compromising. It's going to happen through
Right.
coalition.
Yeah. Yeah. I know compromise solutions oftentimes are
Oh, bad.
not really the way to go. And I think that bringing up the new border bill is actually a good one because you had a group in the Senate who reached a compromise, but because there was nobody who actually agreed with the compromise, in the broader, you know, Congress, it never went anywhere. Because
Yeah.
the compromise was just garbage. I mean, yeah, it was compromise, and you can use it for political reasons, saying, "Oh, look, we brought everyone together to do something."
Yeah.
But what you really did was you just wasted everybody's time, effort, and money.
Yeah.
What you should have done is had something much more simple that a coalition of people could agree on, started with that, and maybe built from there. But
Yeah.
because those ideas are not proffered in government these days,
Right.
You don't get it. It never happens.
Yeah. And again, that coalition could start with just a few people. I mean, in a third party that are willing to go to bat for those good ideas. And it's like, okay, if walk your talk, and these 5 independents say, hey, we need to go this direction. Are you with us? You're going to get a lot further faster because they're not going to vote on any other silly stuff you come up with.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, anyways, well, good. Hey, this was great discussion, and we'll see where this thing goes with TikTok. That was kind of my next thing. Where I think we need to get on TikTok.
Yeah, you know what it would
be? Maybe too late.
We'll get on TikTok, and then a day later, it will be gone.
That would be our luck, right?
Yeah. Then we can always claim that we're the ones that finally broke it.
That's right. We melted it down.
Yeah. Once we came on board, that was the end.
That was the end, right? Oh, Lord. All right, man. Well, that should do it for now, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Yeah. Great talking to you, and see you next week.